Okay, so maybe in further developing like reasons that Buddhists might be skeptical of the kind of actual, so to speak, existence of things out there.
Mhm.
Um, Maybe we should talk a little about causality because it seems to me that a lot of Buddhist doctrine that strikes people as radical, including the idea that there's no self in here, which is part of Mahayana, maybe more emphasized in Theravada, but but a lot of
Pretty universal, yeah.
yeah, it is universal. It's we can we'll get maybe back into the to distinctions between the way the two handle it, but the but that and this idea that stuff out there may not be real. It seems to me that a lot of what sounds crazy and radical to Westerners comes ultimately from taking the idea of causality really, really seriously,
Yeah,
right? And following its consequences further than people maybe typically follow the consequences of that idea.
I think that's right. So if you look at the basic idea of no self, the Buddhist idea is that we have various changing aspects of our person. We have the body and we have various changing aspects of the mind. And the Buddha listed five, what he calls the five aggregates. And
those are the constituents of a person, you might very loosely say, but they're categories like perceptions and
yeah, so
mental formations and the physical stuff that constitutes you and consciousness, and I'm leaving one out, but
ideas, yeah. So the idea is you have feelings. I think you left out feelings.
feelings, right?
Right. So those components, we all know that we have those components, and there's no argument about that. What the Buddha argues is that's all there is. That's all you need, actually. And then once you have a full sense of how those components operate, you don't then also need a subject, an experiencer who's there forever and unchanging across those various elements. Those various components can account for everything. And especially because those components are causally intertwined with one another, and you can sort of trace out how they relate to the world and how they interact in order to generate karma and how they interact in order to generate experience. You get a very rich, detailed account of everything that you need to account for in the Buddhist worldview. And then, they make the claim like once you understand the system, you really don't need a self. And actually, the self is just something over and above all of these changing entities. And what that means is then, as long as you make this claim that, look, what we're calling real is stuff that makes a difference,
Right.
stuff that makes a causal difference in the world. You don't actually get to call a self that has no effect a reality.
Right. So I think this is really interesting, and we should maybe drive it home because Buddhism is here being kind of, you might say, hyper-reductionistic. That's thought of as a Western thing, right? Reductionism, to reduce any phenomenon you see to its most fine-grained causes, right? To say,
Yeah.
I'm reducing human behavior to biochemistry, and ultimately to the molecular or atomic level. That's
Right.
considered this Western reductionist thing, and probably most people would think, well, Eastern philosophy would never be that
Right.
cold, and
Right.
but the fact is, that's what they're doing, and what they're saying is, look, if you want an exhaustive description that really accounts for all the behavior of a system, you're probably
Right.
going to have to describe it at a very, very fine-grained level, and once you get that fine-grained description, giving a name to the whole thing doesn't add any explanatory value.
Right, exactly. And so I think you're right. It's Buddhist reductionism. And, Vasubandhu is inheriting a long tradition of what's called Abhidharma, the higher teachings or the higher truths. And that lays out all, systematically what all these entities are. And he feels like once we have the aggregates, once we have a good explanation, we don't need the self. And he can account for everything. The system just works.
And this line of thinking culminates in a kind of doctrine that nothing is real that can be divided into smaller components, right?
That's right. So the idea is that you break things down into their individual components, and everything is impermanent. So one of the sort of basic premises of Buddhism is the doctrine of impermanence, that everything is in a constant state of flux, everything is dependent on conditions, nothing is permanent and staying the same. And it follows from this whole view of causality, that is, if you want to explain things causally, you have to have things that matter only being those things that are interrelated with other things. If there's anything in the world that matters causally, it can't be something that is outside of the causal story. It has to just be, and that means that everything that exists has to come into being as a result of other things, and everything and be dependent on those things in order for its existence to remain, if it remains at all, and then it has to eventually fade out when things change.
And to return to the idea of not self, that there's kind of no self in here, the version of this would be, if you take the scientific account seriously, which is that you're born with these genes, which are basically like algorithms, or they are programs for responding to the environment. Right. And you're born in a given environment. You're born with the inputs. You're born with a machine that converts the inputs into outputs. And this is the view of Western science by and large, is that genes and environment together are determinative. And so the idea here from Buddhism is, well, it may feel to you as if there is this autonomous thing within you that is causing behavior independent of genes and environment, but why would you think that?
Right. I mean, and it's not just that why would you think that, because it's totally natural. We're all completely obsessed.
Yeah, you feel it. It feels natural. Sure.
It feels that way. And in addition to explaining how everything operates in the body and the mind, the Buddhists are very concerned with explaining why it is that we're so attached to the idea of self and where that comes from, so that then you can learn to untangle that, to undo that causal story. So it's not just that, but yes, I mean, the idea is that once you have a full explanation, you don't need something else. You don't need this sort of eternal, the eternal soul.